Welcome, everybody. This is Dollars and Cents' first economic briefing call. This is kind of an experimental effort we're putting on to try to build, a bit more of like an online virtual community for Dollars and Cents to do some political education for our members and our member supporters, our collective members, our readers. So we're really excited to have you all tonight. My name is Neil Meyer. I'm the development and kind of organizer for Dollars and Cents at the moment. I'm based in New York, and we've got a great panel tonight to talk about some pretty not so great developments going on in our messed up country at the moment. And to lead us through our conversation tonight, we've got Val Voorheis, who's our newest board member of Dollars and Cents, and also a faculty member at UMass, UMass Econ program. So Val, I'm going to hand it over to you, and you're in charge now.
Hi, welcome everybody. This is exciting to break new ground with the Dollars and Cents. So we have three incredibly talented, energetic, and helpful, hopefully, economists here to talk, to help us through some of these issues. Start with Art MacEwan. I think of him as Dr. Dollar. He's also a retired professor from UMass Boston, and of course, a founder of Dollars and Cents. We don't have to say that much about him. Just we've all read his work for 100 years. No, okay, not 100 years, but Brian, your background's throwing me off. It seems old. I'm feeling older. Then we also have Zoe Sherman. By the way, this is a columnist roundup because Zoe also is a columnist for Dollars and Cents. Zoe writes the Economy in Narrative column for Dollars and Cents and is an economic historian, has her, degree from UMass, has been in the Dollars and Cents collective for many years. And I wonder with her whether or not she understood that understanding fiction in economics really meant understanding politics in economics. I don't think we had to have an era where they were so melded together than we do right now. And then last but not least, we have John Miller, professor at Wheaton College. Up Against the Wall Street Journal is his column that he writes for Dollars and Cents. Again, these are times where we need to know, well, these might be times where we actually sometimes agree with the Wall Street Journal, which is a scary concept all in of itself. I don't know, maybe the enemy of your enemy is your friend or something. I don't know what's going on there. But maybe hopefully John's going to start us off by sharing some of his ideas on the current political situation, the current economic situation, and specifically tariffs, based on his most recent and fabulous article in Dollars and Cents magazine. So John, the floor is yours. You can start us off.
Okay. First, hello.
Oh, and for everyone else except for John, we will have the panel is going to talk about their take. Maybe they riff a little on each other's ideas, and then we'd love lots of your questions and comments as well at the end.
So I think the plan is that I'm going to talk for 15 minutes, and I will try to keep to that. Although I went crazy and wrote everything out, so I still think it's going to be 15 minutes, and it's really good to see people and some old friends who I haven't seen for a while. I wrote Dumb and Dumber Tariffs was the title of my article, and it really did three things, and I'm going to try to do two of them, and one of them I'm going to pawn off on Arthur. One is to sort of say what the Wall Street Journal got right about the Trump tariffs. And the second one is to say the sort of free trade policies that they're pushing as an alternative are really no better for most people and for working people. And the third that I did in the article was to say what a progressive policy would be that was neither what the Wall Street Journal favors nor Trump's policies. To do that, I basically lifted what I had to say from a Dr. Dollar column that Arthur wrote, because my wife kept asking me, Ellen kept asking me, so what's a progressive policy? And I would tell her, and she wouldn't listen to me. So I thought if I gave it to Arthur, that he would say those things, and he said them really well. And she said, "Oh, you should listen to Arthur." Um, so here, let me try not to use up all my time chit-chatting, and let me try and do three things. And if anybody wants to ask a question while I'm speaking, that's perfectly fine with me. You'll have to deal with maybe Val around it, but I'm just going to try and be really clear, and maybe I'll go over some material that some people here know a lot about already. The first thing that I did in the article, I made basically 3 points about what we agree with about the Wall Street Journal. So they hammered each one of the Trump tariffs. I mean, it was dumb, yet dumber. Oh no, he blinked. Oh, he blinked again. This is nonsense. It's economic rent seeking. This is not what a coherent policy is. And it wasn't a coherent policy, and they were right on all of those counts. One of the first counts, if I tried to think through, if I had to summarize this, what was Trump trying to sell us? First, it's that, oh, what we need is a Department of External Revenue, not a Department of Internal Revenue, because we're going to levy tariffs on goods that are imported into the country and foreigners, in this really xenophobic and probably racist way. We're going to make them pay, and they've been ripping us off. Now, the first thing to say about that is every economic analysis or every tax aid analyst said, I can't even begin to think about how you can say that. First, if you ask the question, who actually hands the money over from a tariff to the government, which some of us call the statutory incidents by law, you got to get the money. It's the importer. It is not the foreign producer. Um, and then if you ask the more important question about bears the economic burden of that, I think the economic evidence says, oh, I can find a little case somewhere where one of the producers made a special deal for an importer, but it goes overwhelmingly, it's shifted forward by the importers and the retailers onto consumers in the form of higher prices. So it's not going to be paid for by people outside of the country. It's going to be consumers. And I think we all know if it's a burden that's borne by consumers, it's going to be borne disproportionate to their income by people that have less income. The latest data, I think I can say this without thumbing through my notes. The latest data done by the Yale Budget Lab was they put the average cost or the cost to the medium consumer in their reduced household and their reduced ability to consume at about $4,300. That's before you can substitute away from other goods that aren't imported and might be cheaper, and then it goes down a bit. But in the short run, not in the long run like the Eagles, as you were saying earlier, Val, but in the short run, it's $4,300 for the middle household in the United States. Now, if you look at how that's distributed over households, the latest studies say that about 5.2% would be the percentage reduction in purchasing power of a household in the second decile, from 10 to 20%. They don't do the bottom because it's really hard to get data on people at the rock bottom. And then for a family in a household in the top 10%, it would be 2.2%. So this is clearly regressive, right? And it's actually highly regressive. Then if you ask, well, if they raise revenues, what's the Trump plan for what to do with the revenues? he wants to, make his tax cut permanent. And if he makes his tax cut, his 2000 and late 2017, 2018 pro-rich tax cut, it's going to favor the rich. When the Peterson Institute, the International Trade Institute, looked at it, they said, well, if for the top 1%, they'd see about a reduction of $70,000 in their after-tax income. For a family in the middle, they would see about 1,000. That's the difference between, let me get the number exactly right. That's an example, difference between an 8% reduction in after-tax income for someone in the top 1% and a 1% reduction for somebody in the middle. Now, if you combine those together, I think what we get from the Trump policies are a highly regressive change in current policy. I mean, if he had his way, he'd go back to before 1913 when there wasn't an income tax, and when the income tax in 1913 really was targeted at the rich. Now, if that's the first proposition that isn't right, that the Trump that the Wall Street Journal emphasized, let's get the second one that he says all the time. It's going to bring back manufacturing jobs. We have a test study of that that's from the first Trump administration. In March of 2017, they imposed a tariff on steel imports and aluminum imports of 25% and 10%. The Federal Reserve, the New York Fed, did a careful study of it. The study is called Tariffs Hurt Manufacturing Jobs. And what they found, if I characterize it correctly, is that in their December 2019 study, they found that whatever protection steel and aluminum producers got, it came with it an increase in the costs that every manufacturer that uses aluminum and uses steel face higher costs, and that resulted in them producing less and a loss of jobs. The tariff finally concludes that tariffs cost more jobs than they create. If you think of the tariffs that we just put on aluminum and steel, they're 25% each, and not without the exceptions for the biggest importers, the EU, Brazil, Mexico, Canada, etc. So it means that there's not only that jobs aren't going to come back, but we're going to lose jobs in manufacturing through these tariffs. You might think that when they made the exception for laptops and for phones, that might make a difference. But here's a good example of the way to think about it that tells you where the costs are. If you import a Chinese battery directly into the United States, you would pay a tariff 145%. If you import a Chinese laptop with a Chinese battery in it, you would pay a tariff of 20%. And if you imported a Vietnamese-made laptop with a Chinese battery in it, you'd pay a tariff of 0. And the person that sort of came up with the example, I guess for an adult company who can say what he said, is fucking brilliant. Are you kidding me? This is the way we're running our tariff policies. And it just says what's important is if you can get batteries more cheaply, that might affect the manufacturing sector. This isn't going to do anything for it. On top of that, the proposition that foreign producers are going to come and invest in the United States in the kind of uncertain atmosphere where tariffs not only change from administration to administration, they change from day to day and from week to week. How is anybody going to make a long-term investment in that context? And that goes not only for foreign producers, but what about domestic investors. It's just as uncertain, if I can invoke Keynes's favorite term, and we will really see a diminution in the levels of investment. With this much risk and this much uncertainty. With less investment, and with tariffs on consumption, we're going to see less spending short term, less spending long term. We're surely in for a period of slower economic growth. The Yale Budget Lab says they expect a 1.1% reduction in GDP during the year. Now, if you put this together, what do we have? You've got tariffs that are going to drive up prices. We've got raised, hard to decipher policies that are going to lead to an uncertain investment for uncertainty, financial markets that are in chaos. And that means we're going to get a combination of inflation and stagnation at the same time, or slower growth, and probably a recession, although I don't think we quite know that yet. And when Jay Powell said as much yesterday, Donald Trump sure didn't like it. And I think that's more or less what we agree with when it comes to the Wall Street Journal. Those things they got right. Now, what does the Wall Street Journal nonetheless get wrong? Well, their solution is free trade, or an economy driven by markets more and more. And that's not only not going to help working people and everyday people, it's going to create, it was in fact created and got us into this mess to start with in a very real way, not by itself, but the combination of those kinds of trade policies, ever more regressive tax policies that favored the rich, and virulent anti-labor policies together have fostered a level of inequality that returns to kind of the highest levels we've seen in decades and decades and decades, right? And I think the evidence is really clear on that point. If you look at the period of what the people at Fate or globalization call hyperglobalization, it's the period where trade as a percentage of GDP, trade imports and exports as a percentage of the size of the economy or the percentage of GDP increases. It means that more and more of the world's economy is involved in the global sectors of the economy and international trade. The period of extended hyperglobalization or continuous and rapid hyperglobalization was from 1980 right up to 2008 when the financial crisis hit. In 1980, trade as a percentage of world GDP was about a fifth, or 20%. By 2008, it was up to 30%, 29.9%. I think among friends, 30%, right? Now, as that increased, inequality increased in lockstep with it. If you take a measure I like to look at with inequality, is the ratio of the income of the bottom 50%, how much of national income do they get, to the amount of national income that goes to the top 1%. In 1980, that ratio was almost 2-to-1. People at the bottom 50% got 193% of what people got at the top 1. Now, let's not feel bad for the people at the top 1. That's 1 versus 50, right? By 1996, the ratio was just about equal. Their income shares were 15.5 and 15.3%. So the ratio was bound to 1-to-1. That's a dramatic increase in the amount of income going to the very top, where by 1996, people at the top got as much income as the bottom half, not the bottom 10%, 20%, but the bottom half of the population. By 2008, people at the bottom only made 80%, got 80% of the income of what the top 1% got. And finally, in 2022, that ratio was down to 2/3, where people at the bottom 50% only got 2/3 of what went to the top 1%. I mean, that is hand in glove, and it's alarming. Joe Stiglitz, left-leaning Nobel Prize winning economist, said, "We're in a period of extreme economic and political inequality that's incompatible with democracy." And we're seeing this rise of anti-democratic forces. Even Martin Wolf, a man who wrote a book called Why Globalization Works, and is the chief financial commentator for the chief economic commentator for the Financial Times, and who's a conservative market guy, not as crazy as some of ours here in the States, but a little more careful. He has been pounding exactly the same drum. He says, look, we have a level of inequality today that's alarming, that leaves working people, and he uses that phrase, working people and middle-class people behind, and fosters resentment. And it makes them susceptible to carnival barkers that sell kind of autocratic, anti-democratic politics through the mechanisms of racism, through playing with resentments. And I saw there's a little video of Wolf making this speech online to a bunch of high-tech people in Berlin. And he starts by saying, well, and you're part of the problem. Look, nobody gets good information because of you people. And he says, and you know what happens? You leave people behind. They're resentful. They want to see people like you taken down. And worse than that, they vote for crazies. And I think that's exactly where we are today. Trump's policies aren't going to get us out of it. And more of that is only going to make it worse. And that's why, if you want to know what to do, you should ask Arthur MacEwan.
Sure.
Can you fix everything for us, Arthur? You have, a few minutes to fix everything.
It'll take, sure, why not? But just for fun, to start off, I want to disagree on a small point with John in saying that the cost of tariffs is borne by the receivers, and that is we pay the cost in this country. Well, that's formally true, but let's remember what happens to producers elsewhere in the world. They're going to sell less. And so there is loss on the other end, or real costs on the other end. And that has to be part of the picture. Otherwise, they'd be welcoming the tariffs, and they're certainly not. But in any case, I want to raise a couple of other things and then say something about what John said about solving the whole problem. First of all, there's no such thing as free trade. Free trade is a myth. That government in our society, or ever since there's been huge amounts of international trade, has always played a role in affecting that trade. For example, education. High levels of education affects the advantages that a country has in high-tech kinds of production. The support for agriculture is particularly important in the United States, that the government has supplied in leading to the situation where our agricultural exports are terribly important. And one could go on and list very much more things, to say nothing of patents, which are, I mean, you have in these so-called free trade agreements, they're monopoly agreements. They include protections for patents, and you might like patents or you might not, but what they are is a monopoly. And to call them free trade agreements, I just hope the people that did that saw the humor, but they probably didn't. Well, one of the important and interesting things about the current situation is that we've been caught in a simple dichotomy between so-called free trade or globalization, to get away from the term, and the kind of tariffs that Trump is putting on. Those are presented to us as the options. And that's one of the reasons why so many people support the tariffs. They would probably agree that they're not done in the best way and so on and so forth, but they think something has to be done about the Chinese, which of course is a racist way of putting it, a xenophobic way of putting it, but that is how many people put it. And it's been put to them that way by not only Trump, but many of our leaders. I won't name names, but even some on the left have invoked the specter of China as a problem. And the important thing, it seems to me, for whatever we call ourselves, people on the left, progressives or whatnot, is to recognize, first of all, that there are major gains to be made from international trade. That trade is a good thing, not a bad thing, if it's handled in a reasonable manner. Those gains are economic, and I could give various examples, but clearly, we can't get bananas, and I eat a lot of bananas without extensive trade. But it's not just tropical products. A friend of mine who's an architect, whose firm built the facade of the new Whitney Museum in New York. The facade is the whole covering of the museum. And where do you think it was made? It was made in Germany. Because there was this country, I mean, there aren't a lot of companies in the world that specialize on huge facades for big buildings like that. So they shipped the facade from Germany after they made it. And now this wasn't, this wasn't a bad thing, at least as much as I know about it. But it's a good illustration of the fact that you need the specialties that are developed in different parts of the world. The museums in New York, they might have gotten it someplace in California, and now but they found a specialist in Germany that could do this for them. And there are many others. I mean, this is obviously culture, culinary things, and so on. International trade is valuable and important. But people say, what about jobs? If we look at the auto workers, they're quite reasonably, they want to keep their jobs. And that means that they tend to favor the taxes on imports of automobiles. Well, it seems to me that the real issue should be protecting workers, not protecting jobs. That there's nothing of great intrinsic value about working in an auto factory as compared to many other kinds of jobs. I don't mean to denigrate the work in an auto factory, but where things change over time, having nothing to do with imports. And so people have to face up to that and say, well, what are we going to do about it? What we're going to do about it, if we really care about the people, is we're going to provide domestic programs that help with the transition. But for example, you can think of all sorts of things in a domestic program, such as Medicare for all. So when a person leaves their job, for whatever reasons, whether it's imports or a bad boss who's stupid, we won't go into that, they can take their medical care with them. They don't lose it. We've got to have free education at the higher levels. So when a guy loses his job or a woman loses her job, their kids don't lose the opportunity to go to college. And they themselves have to be able to get training for the new jobs. So a good international program is based on a good domestic program in that way. And one can think of other examples where this is the case. We shouldn't figure, how do we stop trade? Because after all, there are many other ways that jobs are threatened. In the automobile industry, the last time I saw a film of the inside of an automobile industry, there weren't any people. They were robots. And it really was neat what they could do, but in terms of relatively intricate steps on an assembly line, and to stop those robots and stop foreign trade, may as well stop them both. Better yet, let them proceed and provide good situations for the working people who were doing that before the robots or the trade came along. And I've just given a couple of examples of that. We can talk more about it. Finally, of course, not every problem can be solved that easily. What I'm suggesting is not easy. The world is a very unequal place there, and it will be for a while. There are things we shouldn't import. We shouldn't import the products of prison labor, slave labor, and child labor. Exactly how we don't do that isn't clear. We also shouldn't support the imports of places where workers have no rights. But all those things are a little hard, especially the child labor one, since child labor is rising in the United States. And since a lot of workers in this country don't have rights. But the point again is a domestic policy is very much tied up with an international policy from the point of view of progressives. So let me stop there and let others get in on the conversation.
All right. Zoe's been listening to, John tell us what we have in common with the Wall Street Journal. Art has exemplified what we don't have in common with the Wall Street Journal. So Zoe, what did they miss? John's already wants to jump in there. So you're going to have to tell us, what we missed.
Well, the issue that I've been thinking about is what's going on in the minds of the capitalist class. Why are they putting up with this nuttiness? Right? Capitalists don't much like uncertainty. And we've got this extremely erratic and incompetent regime that introduces extraordinary levels of uncertainty into the business environment. A month or so, it was sometime in March, I can't remember how far into the month, but it was before the most recent extreme market crashing tariffs and then the pause on them. It was but before that particular phase of the storm. I heard an interview on NPR with an associate dean at the Yale School of Management, Jeffrey Sonnenfeld, and he told NPR that he was talking to CEOs and they were still staying polite about Trump in public, but he claimed that in more candid conversations, a wide majority thought that this administration was nuts and was bad for the economy, and they were embarrassed by it when they talked to international trade partners. And so I thought, are we going to see a capitalist class revolt? Like, if they're unhappy, are they going to do anything about it? So far, not much. So I have to think about, okay, what are they getting out of it? It's pretty obvious what's bad for them. And
well,
they might not be as smart as they think they are.
Yeah. So just hit a couple highlights. What's the bad for them part?
Well, the bad for them is that they can't make plans because they don't know what's going to happen tomorrow and what their costs are going to be. Also, for some industries, their labor force is under attack and they don't know if they're going to have workers. That's not good for industries that use a lot of immigrant labor. And then sort of looking farther down, if they depend on labor with certain forms of higher education, the attack on the higher ed industry is going to dry up their labor force in the kind of medium to longer term. Or there's all kinds of things that are not going to be great for them. But there must be something that they want, because otherwise they would be making a bigger stink. And so I had to think through, okay, what is it that they want that they're willing to wait out this madness to get? And so there were a few things that I could point to. They want the deregulation, right? That was one of today's top headlines in the Times about the acceleration of deregulation. And so capital has long wanted a lot of deregulation. And so we're getting, under this administration, the utter destruction of the regulatory capacity of the federal government. And that's more than they could have dreamed of getting under any other administration I could imagine, or that was sort of a plausible possibility in my lifetime, right? If I imagine what would have happened if they had gotten a President McCain or a President Romney, those would have been pro-business administrations, right? They would have been less regulatory than some others. But those administrations would have been led and staffed by people who have experience in how government operates and aim to behave like serious grown-ups. And so they wouldn't have gone to the extremes that this administration is going to. So apparently, it seems, right, that the capitalists are willing to wait out a lot of short-term destruction of their interests, or short-term, at least, hiccups in their interests, right? They have the resources to wait a lot out, right, because of those income inequality and wealth inequality stats that John was talking about. So they can wait it out. And they seem willing to do that for now to win a long-term expansion of their freedom to exploit and despoil, right, to have no regulatory restraint. So that's one thing. They clearly also want the massive tax cut and the shift of the tax burden onto lower income people. Right, as John was saying, tariffs are in effect a regressive sales tax. Plus, this administration is obviously going to expand the scope for high value tax fraud. Right, when Saez and Zuckman did their Tax Justice Now work several years ago, right, they said already at that point, several years ago, the highest income tranche of taxpayers were already illegally evading somewhere around a quarter of their tax burden. And the IRS was already too short-staffed to keep up with needed enforcement efforts against such well-resourced scofflaws. That's only going to get more extreme. But I can't imagine that the IRS is going to be doing much tax enforcement at all in the coming years, except for against specially selected political targets. Right? It's not going to be a revenue-raising strategy. It's just going to be there's somebody we don't like, so we're going to find something to get them on, and we'll look at their taxes. So, for those who should have a high tax burden, they might like that, right? So they're willing to wait out the madness for that, right? So that they don't actually have to pay taxes. And they want also the dismantling of the social safety net so that workers have no fallback option, and so wages can be forced down even more. And they want the elimination of worker protections, power to unionize, bargaining power over working conditions and wages, and so on. So I was thinking about a historical parallel, right? In US economic history narratives, we often talk about Reagan's breaking of the air traffic controller strike right at the beginning of his first term as this turning point in labor relations, right? The air traffic controllers were a majority white male union of federal workers with important, hard-to-replace skills, which would seem to put them in a relatively strong position, but they lost. And that served as a signal to all sorts of employers that they could play hardball with any workers who tried to win a better deal. And the government would be on their side. And if we think about that in comparison to what's happening now, right, this administration now, their slash and burn of the federal workforce is like that breaking of the air traffic controllers strike, but larger by an order of magnitude or more. From the wave of public sector unionization in the 1960s until this year, I would say, government workers have had some of the strongest and most defensible labor rights that are achievable in this country. They were more likely to be protected by just cause standards for firing, not the at-will employment that allows most workers to be fired for any reason or no reason at all. They had stronger free speech rights in the workplace than private sector workers had, because the First Amendment says that the government cannot restrict your speech. It doesn't say anything about private actors, right? So your private sector employer is not violating the First Amendment if they force you to speak against your conscience or suppress your speech, right? But because the government is not allowed to, according to the First Amendment, is not allowed to govern your speech, workers whose employer is the government had stronger free speech rights in the workplace than anybody else did. That's not the case this year. That has suddenly changed. The pay doesn't tend to be great in the public sector, but the benefits packages and fixed benefit pensions that people used to get in the private sector in some cases, and that really doesn't happen anymore, right? Those fixed benefit pensions, right? Those kinds of things were kind of in some ways the best, kind of the ceiling on what workers could hope for in this country, and that ceiling has come crashing down at the same time that the floor is getting pushed down. So that I think because because the union protections and some of the kind of civil service job protections that even federal workers who weren't in unions had, because those held out longer and were better than what a lot of private sector workers had, I think there was a lot of resentment. But that got directed in the not very useful direction of being, resentment of federal workers themselves, rather than resentment of bosses who didn't give those benefits to other workers, right, in other industries. So I think, momentarily, the destruction of the federal workforce can provide a dose of schadenfreude to people whose employment situations were worse and who don't yet realize how much farther there is to fall. By ignoring all the laws and the standards and the precedents for how the government interacts with its direct employees, and then by firing National Labor Relations Board commissioners, bringing the board below a quorum and thus making it impossible to function, the administration has made it abundantly clear that there's no restraints at all on private sector employers. So workers are really completely on their own against the combined power of capital and the state, right? There's no functioning National Labor Relations Board to help maintain a floor on workers' rights. And then government employment, which was in some respects a ceiling, has come down. So in the longer run, are capitalists going to like what they get? Maybe I'm indulging in my own schadenfreude, but I suspect maybe not. They don't like being restrained by laws, for sure. And so maybe they think they're going to like lawlessness. But I don't think they're going to like totally lawless, nepotistic kleptocracy as much as they anticipated they would. There's a lot of costs involved in trying to do business in a kleptocracy. They're going to have to pay a lot of bribes and kiss a lot of ass. And that's not that much fun for them. So, capital is constrained in a different way in that kind of regime than it is in a functioning social democracy with regulations, that tells them that they can't abuse and despoil to the extent that they want to. They might think they can pull things back before we get to the point of oligarchs' political defections being followed with regularity by mysterious plane crashes. I hope they're right, I guess, but unless the rest of us can pull off a successful revolt before they do, I'm not sure that that's the case. But that's a tall order, so we'll have to figure out how to do that.
So what you're saying is that the capitalists aren't going to bail us out and stop Trump.
I don't really trust them to do that, no.
I think you have to add that they're afraid. That is, they are not well organized, so they can all come out with a cohesive position together. Any one of them who comes out strongly, Trump will go after them. And in the same way, he's gone after the elite universities. And that when it's individuals, and you're not playing by any law rules, I think that, that I always hesitate to have examples of Germany under Hitler, but I think the same much of what you said about Trump probably applies to the German big companies and their leadership as well during the rise of Hitler. They saw it as smashing labor, creating a situation where they could do what they want, and they got war. And that was a little troublesome.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there are lots of people in various kinds of positions who keep thinking that they're using Trump, and they're not.
That's what I mean. Exactly.
Yeah.
John?
I just had one real quick thought, and I don't know the answer, but I thought what both Arthur and Zoe said it's really compelling and it sort of chills you to the bone. and it makes you think hard. And what I was trying to think of is the susceptibility for a capitalist class to tolerate that kind of lawlessness and sort of incoherent policy. Is that a product of a couple of decades of stagnating economic growth, and the old model just isn't doing what it used to? And in the same way that those left behind in today's economy are susceptible to trying any ridiculous thing or any anti-democratic thing, does that mean the capitalist class will less likely to stand by the old formula and say, we've got to get back to it, and now let's try this other stuff? And if it had been the 70s or the 60s, or even, right up to Reagan, they'd probably say, well, no, this is really working for us.
Good point, John.
Yeah, I don't know. Although the profit share has been rising and rising. Like, is there never enough? Apparently, there's never enough.
Never enough. No, there's never
It's
enough.
the size of the pie, too.
Yeah, yeah.
No, I'm not saying I know the answer, but that's what it made me think of.
It's
Yeah,
inter-
no, it's a good question.
Yeah, it's interesting the attacks on, the major universities. We're talking, at UMass when they the ICE was on campus today, so they were arresting people and deporting people, and there's students all over UMass who've been now deported for no reasons, really just maybe, I don't know, the random traffic tickets. So it's scary, but at a place like, Harvard and Columbia, or like use Harvard as an example, the people on these boards that are standing up to Trump are the capitalist class, right? They are. Yeah, I don't know if the capitalist class is, it'll move into but these are hedge fund managers. These are Wall Street managers. They're Harvard educated ones, and the Columbia board is the Columbia educated ones, and the Princeton board is but they're those people. They're billionaires. They're anonymous ones. They're not the ones that we hear about in the news every day.
There's a
But
difference. There's a difference between them and a lot of their fellows in that they are trapped in the universities, and they have to operate differently because of that. And for example, with the bankers, you don't see a lot of opposition from the lower level employees in the banks. You do see a lot of opposition in the universities, and that that attack on the universities has been much greater than any attack directly on business. That the demands that have been made of Harvard and Columbia are, if you're in that world and accept any part of that world, those demands are absolutely outlandish. I mean, that they want to run the how Harvard's going to run its departments. Well, the people that are on the run Harvard as their board of trustees, or it's got a different name. It's not
the
called
corporation.
the corporation, right? In any case, they can't escape what defines the university and the way its practices and so on. And I think they're in a very different position. Harvard also is in a very different position than anybody else because it's got a $50
No, of
billion
course.
endowment. But that even a $50 billion endowment isn't going to last them very long if they're cut off in the way. And now Trump is both talking not only about going after their tax status, their tax exemption, but also the latest I've heard today is he's talking about refusing any visas for people to come study at Harvard. Well, that this is sort of striking at what these people have thought they were doing. And so I think they're in a very different position than their fellows in the ruling class, or whatever term it wants to use.
Yeah. Although I think their kids all go to the same, I mean,
I
they're
understand. I understand.
yeah.
I'm not saying that they're immune from the same mindset of the others, but and even there are a few virtually untouchables who have started to say criticisms. Jamie Dimon has started to say some critical things, and that I think that if they are given just a few encouragements from the Supreme Court, which seems quite possible, that they will get more. We'll get more of that. And I'm not saying that. Don't worry, the ruling class will save us. Don't worry, this terrible Supreme Court will save us. But in spite of themselves, they might make it. They might make a difference.
Things are scary enough now that what we need to save us, it's almost like we need the left and the capitalist class and the courts to get together
But we'll see what
to
we'll
save
see.
us. It's a little scary.
I would just add, I spoke the longest, so I'm not going to try and say anything more about this, but maybe we should ask if people other than us have questions.
Yeah. You guys can unmute yourselves. You can talk across each other, can have a free-for-all.
Well,
There's no regulators. The regulatory capacity has been stripped away.
We clearly don't have common decency anymore.
They are our ruling class.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to offer maybe a comment on Zoe's example. I find the situation more like the heyday of the Catholic Church and the selling of indulgences. You brought up the concept of rent seeking, and this is exactly it. And Trump has made it clear. Remember during the campaign, come to Mar-a-Lago and make me an offer. This is just basic monetization of the position. And, you're looking for coherency in the trade policy. The most coherent thing is the most basic thing, which is cross my palm with silver, or stuff ain't getting in or out of the country. And when you do this and you fragment it, it's mercantilism, but it's mercantilism in the gangster fashion. What was the thing about Suharto in Indonesia, Mr. 9%, is that you had to do anything, cross the palm with silver. This is basically extortion. And so this is a gangster wannabe that, once again, Wharton School owes us an explanation, because if this is the kind of economics that they're teaching there, it is truly remarkable.
I'm not sure he went to class. I think he was probably golfing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, but I mean, the personal grift is clearly the priority more than any kind of ideological coherence or larger project, right? It's a very personal project. Yeah.
Well, it's not just
grift and vengeance.
Attention. He wants everyone to worship. I mean, he's the Catholic Church, but he's the Pope. He wants everyone to worship him.
I have some bad news for Brian. That the Wall Street Journal editorial, Trump's new protectionist age, one of their italics major points is bigger Washington swamp. Tariffs impose costs that businesses will want to avoid. There will thus be a windfall for Beltway lobbyists as companies and countries seek exemptions. So I believe you've cribbed this right out of the Wall Street Journal.
It's a whole new industry, because literally the swamp deepens because you need fixers. And this is the whole thing. This is rent extraction in its finest. Another note about the ethic, I'll make this quick so Petty can dive in here, is that I'm seeing, and it's really fascinating that you bring it up, Zoe, because what the hell's up with the capitalist class? And it struck me really hard about this. First of all, you have the rise of the sort of nouveau riche, these nasty tech bros, move fast and break things, right? And pardon, I'm going to drop the F-bomb, but those motherfuckers do that. And this is their business model, to move fast and break things. old wealth doesn't like that. Once again, not only you cannot plan as such, but that ain't cricket. That is not exactly how they were raised. That's not the old boys network, because it's a control thing with that in the group. And when these people, it creates chaos. It threatens their control. So that's the first thing. The other thing too is that I think that the old wealth is starting to get scared shitless about China, and that they see that boogeyman and they look at the smelly one and they go, this is an imperfect vehicle, but I'm really scared about the fact that China is in fact rising, and that in a very, very real fashion, that this is a direct I'm going to drop the H-bomb, hegemony, for hegemonic control of these old mandarins, the old guard of the Americans. The new tech bros can kind of nuance the relationships with China, buy in, etc. But I think that the old guard is significantly threatened as far as their status and things, as far as winning winning globalization by the rise of China, because they don't really have a stake in that. That's
All right.
my thoughts.
Patty,
Patty.
you're up.
I think we need to distinguish between kind of the idiocy of Trump, that he really is just kind of messing things up from the point of view of the capitalist class. Okay, and so there's a reaction to that. But what he is involved in is two things that are objectives of the capitalist class. One is to actually increase the rate of exploitation of workers. And that means limiting the ability of the capitalist state to act on behalf of the capitalist class to protect the basic process of reproduction of the workforce, and the capitalist class wants to defend U.S. against imperialists, against its imperialist rivalry as China. I mean, I'm not going to take sides between U.S. and China. As far as I'm concerned, they're both imperialist countries, and we don't side with either of them. We believe in the right of workers too, and all the rest of the stuff. So we have to distinguish between these, because what Trump is doing is on behalf of the capitalist class, and maybe doing it very badly from the way the main powers think. He's screwing the workers, okay? This way, that way, the other way. And that they agree with. Now,
Yeah.
some parts aren't so good, some parts they don't agree with, whatever. And in the process of doing that, he's destroying all they love about, democracy and whatever. They don't give a damn about democracy. The idea that they're concerned about the increase in inequality, what they're concerned about is that the increase in inequality might make people so goddamn fed up and pissed off that they will actually revolt. Okay? That's what they're concerned about. And what they recognize, unfortunately, is that our ability to revolt is very limited at this point, and they're taking advantage of that. They know they can get away with that. We don't have unions anymore. Only 6% of the private sector is unionized. We don't have unions. We don't have a Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is not our party. We don't have a working class party. We don't have any political organization, and they're cashing in on that. And to blame it on Trump is to miss the point. Is to miss the point that what he's doing is acting on behalf of the capitalist class, and they don't like the way he's doing it, but they don't disagree with his objectives. They don't disagree with smashing the working class, increasing the rate of exploitation, and building the U.S. in competition with its imperialist rivalries. And I'm opposed to all of that. So I think sometimes we miss the point when we just talk about, is Trump's policy going to hurt workers? Yeah, okay. Well, actually, that really is not a consideration for him or for the capitalist class. It's not it's whether workers will revolt against that. And what I think I'm exciting to see is that there is the beginnings of a sign of revolt. not only on economic issues, but on gender issues and trans rights and so on and so forth, in which people are saying, wait a second, what the hell is going on? And to turn it into, well, what's wrong with Trump is to ignore what is in fact a growing revolt, very, 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 very limited in the US. It's greater in other countries, but a very, very limited revolt against oppression in all of its forms. And so I think we have to put Trump into the context of the class struggle within, class struggle against capital, against labor, and against one form of imperialist power against another form of imperialist power.
All right, Patty. That's awesome. Pally's going to add to that.
Well, I'm actually wanted to ask a question, mostly for Zoe, that it's, none of you have mentioned anything serious about immigration policy yet. And it seems to me that over the years, the Republican Party in particular has had sort of a two-faced approach. On the one hand, they will rant about the terrible immigrants and all of that kind of thing being a threat. At the same time, they are very happy with having a lot of cheap illegal immigrants they don't have to pay very much and can easily get rid of. And, and this is a policy that's worked for agriculture, for construction, for hotels, all of that. It's worked very well over the years of keeping them with supplied with cheap labor. And Trump, by getting really serious about getting rid of all immigrants, Trump is blowing up established, as Zoe calls it, capitalist policy. Yes,
yeah, I think that's true. So what is that? Is that an observation, or is there a question that I probably don't know how to answer? Other than to say,
okay.
yes,
Well,
I
it's just
think I'm
a
observing the same
question.
thing.
Those are the only kind of questions.
How do you interpret that? I mean, to me, it seems like Trump is really going off the rails of the usual Republican two-faced position, but maybe you see something else there, or maybe how do you interpret the Trump and friends' position on immigration?
Yeah, and I wondered as things were starting whether he was really going to do the mass deportations or not, because of that exact deal that you're talking about, Polly, that capital wants the very exploitable labor. And so I don't know. I mean, it could be that it becomes another instance of what Brian's talking about, where, for the right bribe, your workforce, right? If you are an employer of large amounts of immigrant labor, for the right bribe, they won't enforce at your site, right? It could be another opportunity for rent seeking. It could be that the very visible and dramatically violent forms of and arbitrary forms of enforcement help to increase the fear and hence the exploitability, and maybe there's some trade-off between that and how many people are actually still here. I think the targeting of students is a little bit different than the targeting of workers, because I think the targeting of students is an attack on the financial viability of institutions of higher education. And
yeah, sure.
So that, that's a little bit of a different piece of the story. But yeah, I don't know how to resolve it any more than you've already sort of laid it out, Polly.
Could I jump in?
Yes, maybe Arthur can give us a different insight.
I think, first of all, there is no sign yet of anything we'd call mass deportations.
Yeah.
There are what's got, at least in the headlines, and I think it's more than that, is there is these big cases about individuals. From the very beginning, anti-immigration has been his political strategy, and he lies about things and so on. And it's a strategy that works because it gives people something to blame. It's closely related to racism.
Yeah.
If there were a bunch of Norwegians lining up to get in the country, it wouldn't be the same. But they're not. And so I think that's the first thing. I think that it may hurt in the construction industry and the agricultural industry because people will be afraid to come here. But I think that, I doubt that's happened yet. So I don't, and these student cases, what gets you better publicity than to go after a student at a Columbia or Harvard or something like that? They get a little carried away and go after UMass students as well. Yeah, well, anyway,
It's like 15 at UMass that
right,
they've
but
gone
anyway,
after.
I understand, but it's a political strategy, and it's not. I mean, maybe it'll change. Maybe they'll get the mass deportations, but I don't think the workforce of the California pickers, ranchers, is close to being threatened at this point. Also, I think that I disagree with some aspects of Patty's approach. There are divisions in the capitalist class. I think the divisions get subsided sometimes, and I think they're important at other times. I think the divisions are relatively important right now. That doesn't mean they're good guys. I'm not out there cheering for Jamie Dimon or any of the others, but I think it's useful to try to figure out the different behaviors of different groups and what they represent. That doesn't mean that we adopt their positions, but it's, the Wall Street Journal, for example, has been a principal spokesperson for a large segment of the ruling class. And now, it's significant in understanding what's going on as to recognize the things John has pointed out about the degree to which the Wall Street Journal editorial board doesn't like things that Trump is doing. And it doesn't solve our problems. I don't mean that, but one step in trying to figure out what to do about situations is to understand those differences. So I think that's not obscure them, and not in recognizing the differences. It doesn't mean that they're good guys and bad guys in that group, but and as Zoe pointed out, there are real gains for all of them, and the deregulation thing I think is particularly important.
But I do think consumption in the United States is what fuels the economy, even for the capitalist class, though. So on the one hand, the dismantling of the welfare state gives them power over workers, but when 65-year-olds to 85-year-olds use their Social Security checks and can't go to the casinos and can't go to Walmart, that also loses them the customer base, right? So I do think there's a Keynesian welfare state accord, like we want good shoppers, that they're also destroying in this process. And
Long time since
different
we've worried
capitalists
about
have different positions on that, right? Some people need the workers more, some people need the shoppers more. But I think Amazon needs the shoppers, right? So they already have pretty good control over the workers. But they are going to lose shoppers when you destroy people's income and you tax it away. So, I think there's going to be some division that way too.
So, Patty, what do you think?
You're muted, Patty.
Nobody on,
It
yeah.
isn't obviously not a matter of good guys, bad guys, but there are different strategies that capitalists have. And we need to understand those different strategies in order to respond to them. But we should never mistake their different strategies from thinking that they give a damn about anything other than the expansion of capital. So yes, indeed, let's look at that and take advantage of the fact that there are differences between them, and some damages, some ways that they act are, are more dangerous to us than others. But it's that they're not. It's we really have to understand that this is a system of exploitation, and that's what capitalists do, not as individuals, but that's how capitalism works. We talk about increasing inequality. For God's sake, that's what capitalism is. It's a system of accumulation of capital, for God's sake. That's what it is. It's not something that just happens. It's the very fundamental structure of capitalism itself. And it's like, oh my goodness, they're getting richer and we're not. Jesus, haven't we really understood that that's what capitalism is actually all about? And that's what they care for, and that's what they will continue to do. Good guys, bad guys don't have it. Maybe they care for their cats and everybody. That they don't, on some level, they act as the agents of capital rather than, do they care about human beings? What do they think? That's what capitalism is a system of accumulation. We got to go back to the goddamn Communist Manifesto and talk about that's what we're against is class society in its many, many, many forms. And yeah, then of course, indeed, we have to deal with it on the level of stopping, putting a stoplight down the street so kids don't get run over. I mean, it's not like one or the other. It's not like we don't have to deal with the immediate here and now because all we care about is some glorious day. It's a matter of mobilizing people to recognize what we are involved in is a system of capitalist accumulation that is destroying our lives and the planet and all the rest of it. That's it.
I respond a little bit? First, Patty, I don't think you're right that Arthur all of a sudden cares about people a lot. I've known him for a long time, and I don't think that's him. That he understands class exploitation. But I think there's a couple of things going on about Trump that really are unique to Trump, and that I wouldn't throw out an emphasis on what Trump means for the ability to exploit. And I thought that was the tenor of what Zoe was saying, that it's uniquely positioned to be able to do that, uniquely positioned to orchestrate with lots of people pulling strings behind him, a kind of rampant disregard for the rule of law, a trampling of the welfare state, all of which has the ability to increase exploitation across the economy. But I also think that this is a mixed bag, that it comes with these pieces that are really problematic. And I don't know that just his kind of exploitation leads to people sort of seeing it's an exploitative system any more so than they did before. And in fact, it's his kind of ability to obscure that and to sort of find, others from elsewhere, others based on their race that can be blamed, that makes him particularly dangerous at this point. And and I think people that the traditional capitalist class, they sort of know he can do these things that they really can't, but he also does them in these quirky, destructive ways, and they're sort of made a bargain about it. And on the deportation point, I think we haven't seen it happen full scale, but I remember David Bacon, when he was writing about deportation, says his fear is that things will become so bad that people will self-deport. And if that is, and that kind of pressure is really coming down now, and maybe that would happen in a way that would sort of fly in the face of exactly what you were saying, Polly, is that, who's going to build the houses? Who's going to, in Boston, redo your floors? Who's going to, clean your house, mind your kids, provide, pick agricultural, provide agricultural products, be the agricultural day labor force. And surely without them, we're in huge trouble. But I do think we haven't seen that kind of deportation in a show. But if that show has the showcases has the ability to sort of intensify the fear, it could lead that way.
Polly, your hand is up.
Yeah, I just wondered also what you make of the administration's open welcoming of criminal activity. That is, of stopping the prosecution of crimes, of pardoning convicted criminals. I should think that your average capital class would be absolutely terrified. I mean, they're pardoning big time thieves.
Pal, you're
Not to mention
frozen, but you
crypto,
ended
which
with
is
the
not.
capital class is terrified. I wish maybe they are. I don't know if that you said something after that, but you were frozen.
Oh, I don't know I don't remember what I said.
I mean, the kind of the lack of rule of law, um, whether it's deporting students for traffic tickets or saying that he's going to take birthright citizenship or having customs and engagement be more involved in airports and having people have 4-hour searches, and that stuff is freaking out even citizens, right? And it's freaking out the people who have the capitalist class who have kids at universities at Harvard and Columbia. They're like, if these rich international students are getting kicked out, like, what if my daughter wants to go travel? What if, what if he wants to get at me? I think there's a lack of the lack of rule of law, I think, is scaring people in general. That it's one thing to get rid of immigrants or to get criminals, but there's no process. So that could be anybody. And he's happy to have it be anybody so far.
I think you might be amazed at the number of people that don't care about due process. Let's remember that I every time I see a thing, his support is declining. Well, there's still almost half the population is supporting what he's doing, and I think that I don't think we have to have too much coming. They don't. He's done all these things that you and I think are horrible, but he gets away with it. And I think it's quite possible that the Supreme Court will let him do a lot of the terrible things, and that they'll have support for it. And so I think we should be ready insofar as we can. I'm not sure what that means, but the things he has done so far have not cut into his support nearly as much as you would think. I mean, at least that I would think. Let me speak for myself. But then I live in a bubble.
I'd like to chime in here after Art. It's the weaponization of cruelty. This is not new. This has been built up over and over and over again. It's Pavlovian. They respond to cruelty. And he has to keep feeding it on a daily basis. These selective ICE raids, etc. It's a reason for that. Not so much mass deportation, but selectively to basically kind of serve notice this. It's chaos, but it's this infliction of cruelty. and his base gets off on it. He gets off on it. And we freak out over it because this is just bad. This is wrong.
Come to your citizenship hearing. Oops, we're going to arrest you at it.
I mean, it's nasty. You don't do this. That poor woman who was there, a car window broken out today, and it was dragged out. That guy, that was a stringer that ICE hired, was a militia member. This is like a friggin' Nazi that was brought in as a freelancer to quote help ICE as a stringer. What the hell? This is Massachusetts. You know, what the hell are we allowing these people here? And certainly on campus, the state of Massachusetts had better start getting its act together, because they are not following the law.
Yeah.
And
so
they should
they're
not.
They weren't on campus, but they were in. So half the students live off campus, though. So they were in the apartment complexes.
Oh.
Just so you know, the chancellor was like, they literally weren't on campus, but you know, people live in a community. You know, there's. Yeah. It scares me a little. But it also makes me feel great that there's so many people who are analyzing it so carefully, thinking about history, thinking about what we can do, thinking about the economics of it, wondering what the capitalist class will do. You know, there's a lot that we can take courage from in the work that Dollars and Cents does. And I think that maybe, does anybody have anything else they want to sum up before I turn it back to Neil? Because we need to get this information out there, and Dollars and Cents does that. So, and if you want to write something for Dollars and Cents, please, let John know.
Yes. Well, thank you, everybody. This has been, I think, a really important discussion, good discussion. We're going to use some of the clips from our presenters for various audiovisual opportunities in the future. And yeah, this is our first economic briefing call, hopefully the first of many. I think I've had an email correspondence with almost everybody on here. I'll drop my email in the chat, but if you would like to talk afterwards about anything, give us feedback. Would love to hear it. We're trying to shape this, hopefully kind of invite more people next time. We're sort of building it slowly, the audience base, but the idea is that we'll be bringing in our collective members, our board members, our some of our most loyal subscribers or donors or supporters, and kind of try to build a community around it.
Maybe add some music. We'll get some music.
We will add some music. Yes, I think that would be very important at the introduction, to have a little bit of musical journey there. But yeah, thank you so much. And it wouldn't be a small lefty startup, a feisty little project. We're not really a startup. We've been around for 51 years now, but a feisty little project if we didn't ask for financial support. So if you have a few bucks and you're willing to throw it our way, we'd really appreciate it. Drop that link in the chat as well. But yeah, we do need money to keep going, even in these difficult times, especially in these difficult times. So yeah, thank you everybody so much. And I hope you have a good night.